Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is your girl Mitzi, and this is Mitzi. Let's think about it. Today, we are thinking about spiritual intelligence. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is another lucky special guest episode where I have Dawson Church here, who is going to share his perspective and time with us about this topic. So, thank you so much, Dawson. I really appreciate you coming onto my show and just taking the time out to share this. And I'm really curious. Why do you think spiritual intelligence is an important type of intellectual need for human beings in general?
Well, we began measuring intellectual intelligence a century ago, more than a century ago. And it's been a really interesting measure to look at and see how people's IQ is, how it affects things like various abilities, life path, career success, and so on. And then we didn't pay much attention to other kinds of intelligence. We thought the mind was so important. And what we began to realize, like in the 1980s and 90s, was that there was this other thing called EQ, or emotional intelligence. And it turns out that emotional intelligence is enormously important. We can have all the intellectual intelligence in the world, and we all know people who are super smart, Mitzi, and they got all these facts at their fingertips, but their heads are really just where they live from, and they aren't in their hearts. And so EQ, emotional intelligence, taught us to be in our hearts. What we are now starting to discover, especially in neuroscience, which is the field I'm very involved in, is that spiritual intelligence, which I define as the ability of our local, individual, personal mind and consciousness to connect with something greater than ourselves, the consciousness of the universe. And mystics have been describing this for thousands of years. We know people who do this regularly. We probably at some point in our lives have had one of those glorious experiences where we watched a sunset or held a friend or held a baby or walked with our feet squishing through the sand on the beach. And we had this moment of sublime sense of and perfection about the world. Didn't last probably for most of us, but for the people who meditate, for people who do connect regularly with that world, it's incredibly powerful. As we understand it, neurologically speaking, which is again my work, we're realizing that actually is the fundamental intelligence that actually undergirds other intelligences and results, if we master it, in us being super happy. That's how I came to it.
That's interesting. I like the way that you broke it down, and I like the fact that you have a intellectual portion of it. You know what I mean? Because your main focus is neuroscience. So all of those people out there who love the brain and the science portion of it, sometimes those type of people are very hard to understand the spiritual aspect because you really can't see it. You know what I mean? So I love individuals like yourself who come onto my show or just come out to the world and break it down where, you know what, there's something else to this. You know what I mean? There's something else behind the science that we are not seeing and that we need to start grasping and getting ourselves connected into, because once we do, it really connects the dots to everything else that we know. You know what I mean? Because once I started exploring my spiritual intelligence, goodness gracious, things started making more sense to me than than anything else. You know what I mean? I had a brain fart because I couldn't even think about how it really connects, because it just connects in so many different ways. So for you, when you were walking through your life, I mean, when did you realize, like for yourself, that my spiritual intelligence is lacking or I need to start connecting more within it?
I grew up in a kind of a weird anomaly in that my parents were very religious. My father was a minister. My
Okay.
mother was very deeply involved in the church. All the members of my family, they were clergy, they were deacons, they were priests, heavily involved in religion. And so that was um, the background I grew up with, and yet it wasn't at all spiritual. And so I was having spiritual experiences, feelings of oneness, feelings of connection. And I remember just having no one to share them with. And so by the time I was like 11, 12 years old, I was really depressed and miserable. And then I had an experience when I was around 14, when I was like lying in my room on my bed one day and I was suicidal. I was so just in despair about the life I lived and the world I saw
Mhm.
and how unhappy people were, because I could see my parents weren't very happy, my uncles and aunts and my people in my extended family, the people in the church. I mean, they believed in God, but man, they just were full of judgment and anger and blame and criticism and resentment, and I was a hotbed of misery. And so I in this really kind of situation, I was lying there and feeling very very distant, and suddenly I found myself floating in space. I had this extraordinary experience, and the term we give this in psychology is an anomalous experience. You become aware of an anomalous reality, and that anomaly could be you have a clairvoyant experience, you have a pre experience, you have some kind of altered state you get into. And they're called anomalous, but it turns out that virtually everyone actually has them. And so mine at 14 was suddenly feeling as I was floating in space. I was staring out at the cosmos. I was seeing consciousness. And my experience was that the universe was full of love. And it was just shattering to me. It shattered my reality to have that experience. Now, I came back after a while into my body, into my ordinary awareness, but I never forgot that experience. Even though I had a very difficult rest of my teenage years and into my 20s, I eventually joined a spiritual community when I was 15 years old and studied the world's perennial philosophies, the world's mystical traditions. And so I was really into that from an early age and getting a little bit happier, and then learning psychology and getting a little bit happier still. And then when I began to meditate every single day, which wasn't until my 40s, I found that my life changed quickly and radically. And then I began to have experiences not feeling good, but of ecstasy. And the mystics, I mean, Rumi, the poetry of Rumi talks about these ecstatic states that this Persian mystic found himself in 1,000 years ago. Hildegard of Bingen in the Western tradition, Francis of Assisi, Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. I mean, these people were just on fire with these ecstatic experiences they were having. And so I began to hit those myself, to that mystics in every tradition, Tibetan, Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, Jewish, Taoist, all of these mystics are having these experiences, and they just utterly transform you. But the cool thing is they transform the brain. And so one clinical trial I did was putting people into MRIs. We had people put in MRIs. We measured activity. We then had them spend a month doing a very special science-based called eco meditation. After a month, we put them back in the MRI. Control group showed no change. The group doing eco meditation had wiring going on, and their brain function was quite different in just a month. So anatomically, structurally, and functionally, their brains were different, and it did not take the 10,000 hours of the traditional spiritual path. It happened in a month. So we're now showing through neuroscience, if you use science-based techniques, you can start to replicate these mystical states. You grow your spiritual intelligence, and your level of well-being, your level of just generally feeling good about yourself and the world and the universe grows dramatically, and that in turn reaches out and affects your whole life. So that's really what I'm focusing on sharing with people right now.
That's funny that that you just said that last part because I was like, man, I wonder why he wanted to share. And then you just said it too. So thank you for already answering that question. I appreciate that. That was very in-depth, detailed, and I really like the fact that you broke it down the way that you did because, some people they need to hear it in that extent. You know what I mean? To be able to visualize it, to be able to put themselves in that shoes because there's so many visual learners out there in a world that is so monotone that doesn't provide you that visualization to capture it. You know what I mean? To make it relatable in some way, shape, or form. So I thank you for that. And I looked up a quote and I'm really curious to hear your perspective on it because it's about spiritual intelligence. And I want to know your opinion on what does this quote mean to you? So if you're ready, I'm ready.
Go for it.
Awesome. So the quote is knowledge without spirit is like finding yourself on a cold night with all the wood in the world and no flame to ignite it. So what does that make you think about?
Wow, that's powerful. Well, what we find in the brain of people as we see their brain function. So nowadays, MRIs are really high resolution, just the way smartphones have become higher and higher we have retina displays, we have all these things now we didn't have 10 years ago or 20 years ago. MRIs are the same. And now we can see down to the level of a single neuron. And in my book, Bliss Brain, I have one image from a scanning electron microscope, and it shows twitching in real time as they communicate with each see them like twitching as they are signaling each other, and they as they twitch they get closer and closer and closer, and at the end they actually wire together. And the whole process from firing together to wiring together takes 12 seconds. So we are wiring neurons in our brain every few seconds. And what we find in the brains of people who are developing this is they have the match, they have the flame to ignite this ability. And so we all have these structures in our brain, and there's a whole network for compassion, there's a second network for attention, there's a third network for regulating your emotions. And so we call all of these working together the Enlightenment Network. And every single person has these structures in their brain that are part of the Enlightenment Network. But it's like the wolf. Everyone has them, and in most people are turned off. And what turns them off is the stress network. Either the stress network is active, or when the stress network dials down, all of that blood glucose, all of that oxygen, all of those nutrients are available to other networks, including the Enlightenment Network. And these sages, these mystics, have just gotten really used to igniting their woodpile, and they can light up their Enlightenment Network very, very easily. And so their brain function is radically different. In one study, the researchers looked at their level of happiness. They measured gamma, which is the brainwave of compassion, integration, creativity, awe, joy, gratitude, all these positive emotions. It's mediated by this part of the brain. They found that part of the brain and the brain waves that are generated in those emotional states, they went up 700% in people in these states. So you aren't just getting, 1, 2, 5, 10% happier. You are just walking around with your feet barely touching the ground. You're so happy. That's what we find in people who do this. So spiritual intelligence is what ignites that wood pile, turns on that enlightenment network, shuts down the stress network, and you just go into the super happy, super compassionate, super grateful, and awe-filled life.
Wow, I really like that. It's really interesting because it just shows that when you are able to tap into that network and just to ignite it and to light up that spiritual or that cognitive thought, it just makes you realize like, wow, something within you just changes and it has a ripple effect. So it's exciting to know. I mean, I don't know how people don't want to tap into their spiritual intelligence because it's like a bond, within yourself, and it's something so much greater, and it's beautiful. I think it's just a beautiful relationship that you can have within yourself. And it made me bring up another quote. This will be the last quote, I promise. And it says, the spiritual intelligence is knowing the long-term consequences of every thought that we think of. And that's kind of like the other one where it's like once you ignite it, you kind of have to be prepared for that flame, or you got to be prepared for that responsibility, but that's what I think about. But for you, what are your thoughts when you hear that?
Well, thought is powerful, especially when it's linked to strong emotion. And what we find, for example, is that by thought and emotion alone, we can create molecules. And the example I give in my book, Mind to Matter, is cortisol. And cortisol is our main stress hormone. We need a little bit of cortisol every morning to get us out of bed and motivate us. Too much cortisol is like poison in your system. Too much cortisol results in lower muscle mass, lower bone density, learning and memory problems, skin wrinkling, all kinds of things happen when we have high cortisol. And so if you have chronic worries, chronic stress, you drive your cortisol high, and you literally are turning on and off the genes of cortisol in your body with your mind all the time. If you are stressed, you're turning on a gene, your adrenal cortex gets the message to turn on this gene called CYP11B1. And CYP11B1 codes for cortisol, makes cortisol when that gene is expressed. And so you, for example, have a car accident, you're going to be emotionally triggered by the shock of the car accident. But if you're telling your friend about the car accident later and you're still getting stressed while you think of it, your body starts making cortisol even when there's no real accident there. And many of us are in this state. We're thinking about, we're reflecting, we're ruminating on negative things in our lives, driving our cortisol high, and there's nothing wrong. So that's the way in which we literally are creating molecules with our minds. And so smart people look for ways to reduce their stress, to regulate their level of emotional intensity and calm themselves. And that's why I teach meditation. Meditation really is a good, quick way of just coming back to that heart-centered place, that feeling of love inside of you, and then moving yourself to that joyful space. And you can do it in a few minutes. Like with eco meditation, it takes about 5 minutes, and we have you do a few simple things. There's a certain breathing rhythm that very, very quickly puts you into this calm state. There's a way of stimulating your vagus nerve. Again, very simple way of turning on the parasympathetic relaxation system of the body. So all of these things happen, and you can do them in a few minutes. You then feel much, much better, and that then cultivates spiritual intelligence. We used to think that people just had it. You were a Rumi, you were a St. Francis, you were a Hildegard of Bingen, or Mother Teresa, or Gandhi, or you weren't. But we now know that just like working out your muscles, you can work out those neurons again every 12 seconds. Your thoughts are wiring pathways together in your brain. And if you spend your days with negative rumination, with intrusive thoughts, with allowing yourself to be affected by all the bad news going on in the world, you're building those neural pathways. The world gets darker for you. If you're doing the opposite, if you're saying, I'm going to expose myself to positive ideas, I'm going to be with positive people, I'm going to read positive books, watch positive media, I'm going to fill my mind with positive thoughts every single day, then guess what? Every 12 seconds, you're making new neural connections, building those bundles. And in one of the case studies in my book Mind to Matter, I look at a guy who learned meditation, learned mindfulness. His name was Graham Phillips, and he had a comprehensive MRI scan done before he began to do meditation. He had a second comprehensive MRI done in 8 weeks. And in 8 weeks, the emotion regulation circuit in his brain, the ability to regulate your annoyance, your resentment, your anger, your overwhelm, the amount of neural tissue in that part of his brain in just 8 weeks grew by 23%. Now think about that. He suddenly has a quarter more
Yeah.
neurons to regulate all these negative. And so, sure, somebody cuts him off in traffic, but rather than giving them the finger, he says, they're having a bad day. He's compassionate. Somebody does something annoying at work, and he says to himself, I'm just not going to react to that. I'm just going to hold that person in a neutral space. So that's emotion regulation. And these monks have lots of it. We can develop it because, again, that part of the brain is growing enormously quickly as we're practicing compassion, love, joy, and these elevated states. So it's not just mood, it's literally the hardware in our brains. And if we have a lot
Yeah.
of this brain hardware, we're more resilient. We're more joyful. Our creativity, according to some research, goes up by more than 200%. We have a doubling of our creativity. In one study I'm publishing soon in a peer-reviewed medical journal, our productivity at work, how much work we get done in a day, goes up 20% the first month. So we are making radical shifts in our brain, radical shifts in our lives, and our lives are just much, much easier and more productive. So this is not just an abstract theoretical thing where you look at neurons firing and say, oh, neurons that fire together wire together. This is your life. This is your longevity. This is your health. A study published
Yeah.
last week found that 6 key genes are regulated by spiritual intelligence. And if we have regulation of genes, they produce a much longer lifespan and a much longer healthy lifespan. So we are giving ourselves a huge favor in terms of our biology by developing those states of the mystics. And they're
Yeah.
easy to do. It just takes a month or so of practicing meditation, calming yourself, getting out of stress. You light up the Enlightenment Network and you start to feel much better. And again, you're more productive. Your life begins to improve. So there are
Yeah.
compelling reasons to do all of this to improve your quality of life.
Absolutely, I agree. I actually had another guest on my show who actually spoke on meditation, and it's interesting that you brought it up and the way that you broke it down. It basically the same formats, is that he broke it down a little bit simpler for me, but I love the two because it gives me the perspective and makes me realize like, wow, at the end of the day, it's turned into like once you start to change that one habit of those intrusive thoughts, those negative thinkings, the way that you think, the way that you talk to yourself, the way anything that comes out of you, once you start changing that and then you start working within yourself and then working on meditation, even if it's one moment in a day, okay, that's a step. You just need to start, that initial step and it becomes another step and then another step. And he explained it's kind of like running a race. You build your endurance so that when
Yes.
you come to that marathon, you're stable and you're at pace. And by the time you're done, you're happy and you're content and there's no issue, and
Yes.
that's how it is with meditation is that you do it daily and you do it so long that at a certain point that, like you said, it doesn't bother you. Things don't bother you as before that they used to because you learn a different way of thinking, a different way of handling, a different way of receiving the information and not allowing it to control your mind and control your way of life and to control others as well. And it's such a beautiful thing because I wish people would tap into this, I really do because this is something that we all, like you said earlier, we all have access to and we all have the capabilities of doing it. But for some reason, we just put this wall or we put this obstacle or we allow other people to put these obstacles in front of us and it's ridiculous, you know what I mean? So I am curious to know if you could tell your younger self anything, what would you tell your younger self, Dawson?
What a fun question. See, I love it. So, yeah, that's a very good question. And if I could go back to my younger self, my teenage self 50 years ago, and give that poor suffering guy some advice, it would be breathe, love yourself, and release your worries. It's all going to be okay. And we tend to worry a lot. Mark Twain said, I think constantly about all the bad things that happened, about the bad things in my life, all of which have never actually happened. And so we tend to ruminate on all of these things. That engages a part of the brain called the mid-prefrontal cortex, right behind our center of our forehead over here. And so we're often just ruminating on all the bad stuff. And I used to do that constantly. And we think, I mean, back for our ancestors, ruminating and reflecting and obsessing about the snake that almost bit you yesterday and the snake that might bite you tomorrow. That was a really productive thing to do 5,000, 25,000 years ago. Today, it's just causing our cortisol to be high. It's stressing us and it's degrading our quality of life. So I would tell my young self, just don't stress, breathe, love yourself, relax, play, for goodness sakes. Babies, research on laughter shows that babies, toddlers, laugh an average of 300 times a day. Like I have a lot of grandkids, and some of my grandkids are now, one of them's one of them's three, one of them's 13, and these little kids just laugh. They look out the window and they see the light and shadow in the trees. They laugh at that. They look down at their feet and they wiggle their toes. They laugh all the time. Adults don't laugh 300 times a day. Adults laugh an average 20 times a day. We just shut down our laughter. We shut down our play. So go out there, play, and have a blast with your life.
Yeah.
Are there plenty of things going wrong in the world? Absolutely. But there have always been plenty of things going wrong in the world. I was born in 1956, and I can tell you back then we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, we had the Cold War, the Vietnam War, we had imminent nuclear meltdowns, we had all
Yeah.
kinds of absolutely horrible things going on. And we think that our world today is full of strife and chaos. It is no more so than it ever was in the past. There's always going to be stuff going on in the outside. What have you got going on in your heart, though? Are you at peace? You getting stressed about what's going on in the world can make no difference to the world whatsoever. You staying at peace in yourself while things are going on in the world is what counts for you and your own well-being. And then you become this instrument kindness and love in the world. So you walk down the street and you smile at people, and you, like, when I go on a bike ride or take a walk, I just smile at people. When I'm buying groceries, I smile at the person behind the cash register, and I say, "How are you?" And you just connect with
Mhm.
people, and the whole world after a while smiles with you, and you realize we're living in a world in which there is far more compassion and love and joy than there is hatred and confusion. And the research into this shows that as we are the beings, we affect people around us several layers out. And so that's what you want to be, that radiant being, living in that space of love, meditating, releasing your stress, and then you affect those around you. And we're in this wonderful space of cultural transformation right now. Is there a lot going wrong in the world? Absolutely. Is there a lot going right in the world? Definitely.
Yeah, I like that very much. I really appreciate the way that what would you say to your younger self? Because you know what, it's true. Why not? Why not just enjoy yourself and bask in the ambience of what is going on in your now, And it's crazy because people don't think about that. People don't just stop, take a second, and just enjoy the presence of now. They're so worried about before or like the future and how to get there and how to get here and how to achieve this goal and this goal and this dream, or they're stuck in the past, like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I did this, or I can't believe I went through this, or this and this. And it's like, nothing's going to save you until you focus on right now and enjoy it for what it is. Laugh if you have to laugh, cry if you have to cry. But whatever it is, enjoy it for what the moment is. And I think that is something that we all need to remember because, like you said, there's always going to be struggles, there's always going to be ups, there's always going to be down. But that's what life is, it's how we respond to it, and it's how we absorb it and what we choose to project out into this world. And I think that's truly something that we all need to start thinking about when in ourselves, in our communities. And maybe the person that got upset, maybe they're just going through something. Be that upper person
Yes.
and be like, you know what, give them the benefit of the doubt. It's okay to give people the benefit of the doubt because you need to have the benefit of the doubt on you sometimes as well. So I guess as I wrapping up the show, I'm curious, what can be some lasting words of advice? Even though, let's be honest, you gave so much great tips and advice already, what can be some lasting words of wisdom you can leave us off with to keep on thinking?
Challenge your thinking, challenge your thoughts. If you hear negative thoughts coming out of your mouth, or even better, if you catch them before they come out of your mouth,
Right?
then challenge them. Challenge your limited self concepts. Whenever you're about to say, I'm no good at this, my family isn't good at this is the limitation of my life. Is it really? What we find in the field of human potential and spiritual intelligence and positive psychology is that we have the capacity for incredibly happy, joyful, bliss-filled lives. And most of us are living, we're like people who have a palace to live in, and we're living in the dungeon. Really,
Right.
I mean, people talk themselves into such small lives, such limited amounts of joy and happiness. And we even form set points that don't allow us to laugh loudly and sing and dance and express all the love and happiness that is our birthright. So go be as happy as you were when you were 3 years old.
Yes, yes. Go out there and be happy. I'll force you to go out there and be happy, right? I love it. I love it. Thank you so much again, Dawson. This has been such a great chance to just speak to you and pick your brain on this topic. And if anybody wants to know more about Dawson and anything that he has to offer, because he truly has so much great topics that he shares on his excuse me, on his own podcast. He has his blogs, he has books. Goodness, he has so much information to just keep you thinking. And that's the whole point, is just to keep on thinking about life and your life and the world around you and question it and just allow your mind to continue to evolve because there's so much to learn. Why stop now, right? So check out his photo. I have access to his website on my website, and you can find all of the goodness that Dawson has to offer the world. So with that being said, always, always, always keep thinking, y'all. Bye.